A former NFL coach ripped the Baltimore Ravens in what has become a very big trend this week. And Kimberley Martin exposed Mad Dog for his Lamar Jackson insults. Talk about all that and so much more coming up next on a Purple Friday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostraker of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available for you, all podcasting platforms. We got you covered in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe over there as well. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more Ravens podcast, so news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards. We've got you covered over here on the show. Today's episode, Purple Friday edition of Locked On Ravens, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Sam Njoku, Ravens Talk Podcast, back with us here for another Friday edition of the show. Sam, wish we were talking under better circumstances in terms of what happened last week to this Ravens team, as it was just a tough all-around loss to the Steelers in Week 11, minus the defense. Defense did their job. Everybody else really did not, but all you can do is move forward. Now we can look ahead to the latest installment of the Horror Bowl, which should be a pretty exciting one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that matchup. Definitely a strange turn of events for the last game. The Ravens defense stood up and performed, and the offense kind of sputtered a little bit. But I think the Ravens fans and coaching staff, players included, are ready to move on. And what a way to move on. Monday Night Football game against your big brother, or little brother, I should say, Monday Night Football.
Yeah, you got big bro versus little bro over there. And obviously their comments this week, both of them have a lot of love and a lot of respect for each other. But Sam, it's been a common theme after what we saw in Week 11 and what we've seen, honestly, for the Ravens this season in terms of some of their execution issues, sloppiness, and leading the league in penalties. A lot of former coaches have been ripping on this Ravens team. And we even start with like a guy like Bill Belichick, who has consistently said, oh, well, the Ravens, their biggest opponent is the Ravens themselves. And that has been very true this season. You have coaches like Jon Gruden, who, again, some not so great stuff off the field for Jon Gruden, and we all know that. But he was talking about how the penalties, it makes him mad, it pisses him off. He's like, you got essentially all these holding calls that are happening, and you got to clean up on the penalties. And that's been everywhere. Rex Ryan, former Ravens coach, has been absolutely going off on Todd Monken and John Harbaugh, saying, yeah, there's only one offensive coordinator that can beat this team, and it's Todd Monken himself. So it just seems like a trend, Sam, that's like, we know this team is talented. We know they have a lot of guys on their roster, but you look at all these penalties and all these execution issues that are happening, and it's just like, can a team realistically win a Super Bowl if that trend continues? I don't really think so.
No, the Ravens are the most penalized team come playoff time. They're not going to win the championship. There's no way. But the good thing about it is these type of penalties are easily fixed. I'm more concerned with the execution aspect of the team, and the Ravens seem to be more often than not better in that regard. I think, just some coaching that needs to be done, a little more emphasis on executing properly, not doing too much to cause you to get penalties. I think a lot of Patrick McCarry's, illegal man downfield, those are easily fixed just to Harper, when in situations like that with a guy like Lamar Jackson, the plays extended, you can't do what you did there and cause that penalty. So I understand the trend, the shift to knock the Ravens, because, everybody had them here at the pedestal, and to lose in the fashion that they did against the Pittsburgh Steelers have a lot of people scratching their heads. And, in the national media, when you do poorly in one game, they're going to knock you. I'm sure if the Ravens succeed and do well in this game, they'll prop them back up.
And I think they have to at least just start getting back in the right swing of things, because even if it's not, they're eliminating every single penalty, they're going to get penalized again. I mean, that it's not going to happen where they don't get penalized in every game. But you lead the league in penalties, like you talked about. Now they lead the league also. It wasn't this way last week. Now they lead also in average penalties per game. So you have to be able to execute better, because, and I agree with what John Harbaugh said after the game, Sam, a lot of the reasons why the Ravens lost that game, there are plenty of them we can point to, but they just absolutely destroyed their momentum on what seemed like half or more of their offensive possessions, because they'd have a nice 7-yard chunk run but then it will get called back due to a holding penalty. And all of a sudden, instead of 2nd and 3, you're in 1st and 20. Or you mentioned the illegal man downfield. They throw a screen pass to Derrick Henry, picks up nice 15 yards. Well, the carry was downfield because Lamar had to hesitate for half a second, and all of a sudden you're marching back again. And it's those types of things where you are establishing that momentum, and then you yourself are taking it away. And is every penalty a penalty? Of course not. There are bad calls all the way across the board. We've seen that for the Ravens and honestly every team this year. But you can't put yourself in a position where you let the refs decide a game. And the more that they see you making these mistakes, they're going to be keeping a sharp eye out for it. And then something that's not a penalty becomes a penalty. And it just stacks on top of each other. And we're talking about a team that if maybe 1 or 2 penalties goes the other way, they probably win that game against Pittsburgh just because of momentum. And I think momentum is it's a fickle thing where you can take all of it at once, or you could give it all away at once. And I feel like for the Ravens, Sam, they just gave it all away. And they have been doing that for the majority of the season. Now, they've overcome it a lot of the time. They're 7-4. But those 4 losses certainly loom large, especially when a lot of this is just sloppiness at times.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't want to point to the penalties and things of that nature because the Ravens have overcome a lot of their deficiencies, penalties, execution, things of that nature, maybe personnel decisions that offensive coordinators are making that they probably shouldn't be making, pivotal moments in the game. So the Ravens have overcome a lot and are still finding ways to win. Execution-wise in that Steelers game, the Ravens played great. I thought they did a good job. A lot of things that I saw on film articulated itself into game day action, but those penalties, they stalled you. They kept you at bay. They kept you. Of course, the missed field goals are another thing that really harpered the Ravens from picking them that win. But yeah, the Ravens need to clean up those penalties because they're moving the ball effectively. They're the number 1 offense for a reason, right? So no one expects them to falter in that regard. But yeah, if you're playing these tight matchups, every penalty begins to count. You saw the Ravens kind of trying to play catch up after those penalties, and they did so in the 4th quarter. They fell a little bit short, but that game's completely different, and those penalties get washed away.
Yeah, and when you have Bill Belichick, who we know was a legendary head coach, talking about this seemingly every other week, or Rex Ryan, who has had his fair share of moments, he's talking about it too. You got all these former coaches, everybody's seeing the same thing. And I know the Ravens see it too, right? And John Harbaugh went up there on Monday and said, look, the buck stops with me. Because there's been a lot, Sam, about just who to blame for the penalties, right? A lot of people have been like, all right, it's John Harbaugh's fault because he doesn't have his team ready to play. Oh, it's on the players because Harbaugh's not going out there and he's not holding somebody or going downfield and illegally blocking someone. But Harbaugh did take that accountability, said the buck stops with me. Do you think it's a combination of both? Do you think it's only on the players, only on the coach? How do you kind of see where the fault should get distributed here?
It's a combination of both, but at the end of the day, it is on the head coach. He has to make sure his team is ready. And if you're getting penalties the way in which they were getting penalties, it means you're not properly prepared for the game. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Now, a lot of that has to do with, the Tom Monken's offense is very complex. There's a lot to take in, both on offense and defense with Zachary Orr's defense. So it is complex. There's a lot to take in, but at the end of the day, your job as the head coach, get your team ready. And there's few things that, as a head coach, you really have, an effect on the game naturally, but having preparedness, being prepared, making sure that this team knows what they're doing. There were even situations in that goal line stand. I mean, that 2-point conversion where the 2 players didn't really know what was going on. That's on the coach. You want the player to be ready, but that's on you to make sure they're ready. So I put that on the coach, but it is a combination of 2 things. I mean, you can coach and coach and coach, and these players don't get it. What are you going to do? So I definitely get that, but accountability has to go to the coach, and good for John for taking that accountability, and I'm sure he'll get his team ready for this one. I'll be pretty surprised if they're the most penalized team in week 12 after this one.
And we'll talk about it kind of moving into the third part of the show a little later, but this Chargers-Ravens game is so massively important. You cannot afford to mess up a lot in this game, especially against a Jim Harbaugh coach team. And we know those Jim Harbaugh coach teams, they're nothing to play with. You got to be on your A game every single time, especially with the way that we've seen some of these Chargers units look. But speaking of units, Sam, it's not just on the offensive side of the ball this is happening. Obviously, there are defensive penalties, but the one that John Harbaugh specifically called out, and I've been kind of looking at too, is special teams. Seems like special teams penalties have also put the Ravens in a bind for a lot of the season. We saw it obviously on Sunday as well, where they get a decently nice return, and then all of a sudden it's coming back because there's a holding penalty. And those special teams holding penalties are just so detrimental because you could have a return go 40 yards down the field. If that holding call happens at the 25-yard line and you gain 40 more yards, that ball's coming back like 50 yards to the spot of the foul plus those 10. So they have to be better there because we know, Sam, this is a proud special teams group. That's what the Ravens have kind of hung their hat on for years and years. But over the last couple of years, they've gotten a little bit sloppy in that regard, and the special teams unit hasn't been as good as people have been used to in Baltimore.
Yeah, and pride is the devil. I think sometimes John Harbaugh does take pride in that special teams unit, but maybe he may be better off if he let that kickoff go out of bounds and started at 30, because those penalties are, in fact, a killer. And even though the Ravens offense is good, you'd rather have Lamar starting at the 30 than at the 15 or inside the 20. So definitely something to look at, but you're absolutely right. Those special teams moments are killers, and I'm sure John is taking pride in that as the season progresses to make sure that his unit is ready. And there are some bright spots to the special teams unit, and I'm sure he's going to have this team ready for it. But you're right. They cannot afford to be behind the eight ball, and I know we'll talk about it later on the show, but this is a Chargers team where you do not want to be behind very much, and those penalties could be the difference in the outcome of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like, Sam, at least for me personally, when the Ravens have to go 92 yards or 95 yards, I feel confident they can do it more often than I don't, but it's also so hard to do that. Like, I think that people see Lamar do it, at least this season. It's a lot easier for him this year because the offense is so good, but that is a really, really hard thing to do consistently. I think it speaks to how good the Ravens offense has been this season, but you want to have your guys go start out at the 35-yard line. You don't want to have to be pinned back inside your own 10 every 3 possessions because there's a holding penalty. And I know it hasn't been that extreme, but it feels like whenever they need momentum, there's some way, shape, or form they give it away, whether it be penalty, sloppiness, coaching decision, whatever you want to call it. It's just been very detrimental, and they have overcome, but they've also gotten lucky in some of that. And then they've also, it's so weird because they'll win a game by 40, and then they'll go out there and they'll just put up an absolute clunker, which is just the state of football, state of the league, and teams do that. But it just feels like Baltimore, that's the MO for them, where it's like, oh, they look so dominant. And then, okay, now they're playing down to competition and lose to a Cleveland, let's say. And that's just, it's a tough scene for everybody. But obviously Lamar Jackson, he's been at the center of this thing for the Ravens. And coming up in the second part of the show, Mad Dog threw some insults at Lamar a couple of days ago. Kimberley Martin exposed him. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And I want to shout out my family, my parents, brothers, everybody, because I wouldn't be where I am without them today. And they've been so supportive of me throughout my life. And this month is all about gratitude. Along with the people I just shouted out, there's another person we don't get to thank enough, and that's ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything. And in this crazy world, that isn't easy. Here's a reminder to send some thanks to the people in your life, including yourself. And therapy has so many benefits, from learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, empowering you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma, it's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off the first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And the show is brought to you by Game Time. There's so much hype and awesome atmosphere around watching basketball live. You got celebrity sightings, the sound from the court, and the feel of the crowd. For me, I love going to Nuggets games when they're around the area, so I try to go down to those when I can. But Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And Game Time has tickets for all events, concerts, shows, etc., not just sports. So for this Ravens and Chargers game coming up, Game Time Picks is where you need to be. They have super deals and other tiers of deals you can look at. And the app has so many features such as Game Time Picks, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Game Time ticket coverage, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oshieker and Sam Njoku still talking with you here on this Purple Friday edition of the show. Appreciate everybody again for being here. Be sure to like and subscribe, video form and audio form as well. Now, Sam, we've seen a lot of Lamar Jackson, whether you want to call it insult, slander, whatever words you want to go with. We talked about it last Friday with Stephen A. saying he got a text from Lamar's camp, and Lamar's like, come on, what are we doing here? Well, on First Take, Mad Dog after the game called Lamar Jackson's performance against the Steelers putrid. He said, oh, he can't beat the Chiefs. He can't beat the Steelers. That's been a common narrative this week. And then Kimberley Martin, because he was all on the Josh Allen train. He was like, oh, Josh Allen is so good and better than Lamar. And Josh Allen, Josh Allen MVP. And Kimberley Martin, she put the little reading glasses on. She said, let me look through my notes here. Mad Dog, didn't you say a couple weeks ago that Lamar Jackson was better than Patrick Mahomes and was singing his praises and going off on everything? That, oh, Lamar's great and Lamar's doing incredible things. And now you're sitting here and saying that, giving him all of this flack and all of these insults. And Mad Dog is like, oh, that's funny. You created all that up. But this is exactly what we're talking about national media wise, Sam, when you're just looking at everything that happens. This is what it is. It's almost like someone says something a week ago, and then the next week it can be completely different. So Kimberley Martin exposed Mad Dog. I don't really think Mad Dog knew what to say because he ended up just throwing out a vile insult saying that Lamar can take the MVPs and shove them where the sun don't shine, which is just completely disrespectful and ridiculous in the first place. But again, this is what national media is, where one thing is said and then another week, another thing is said, and it's just all these contradicting opinions. It's almost like every week, Sam, your opinions reset. That's essentially what it feels like. And throughout the whole thing, the best part to me was that Stephen A. Smith was the voice of reason in this conversation, which, I gave him a little round of applause yesterday saying, hey, they got the beef going on, but Stephen A. is saying, okay, well, one game doesn't make a season. That was the most sensible thing between Stephen A. and Mad Dog that was said. But Kimberly, she had those receipts ready.
Yeah, and, there are very few national media members who I would say have common sense, and Kimberly's definitely one of them. That's why I tell people, listen to your local media, sports guys, because they know what they're talking about. Mad Dog is probably just trying to get a rise out of Ravens fans, out of anyone that knows sports. Well, I think it's a little ridiculous, obviously. I think that, right now, Josh Allen has had bad games as well. This is probably Lamar's first bad game. Lamar's still clearly the MVP. I don't understand the notion that, quarterbacks are going to have bad games and they'll have people to lean on. This is the case where Lamar didn't really have much to lean on besides his defense. So I don't know. Mad Dog is just crazy. I don't take too much of what he says seriously, but it's a good thing that Kimberly was able to come at his bat and let him know, hey, last week you said Lamar was the greatest, and now you're switching it up. What's changed? A Steelers game to 60 minutes of football in case of a whole season of outlook to look at. So,
and you look at the conversation between Lamar and Josh Allen, and look, Josh Allen's heck of a quarterback. He's having a heck of a season, but the only thing that Josh Allen has over Lamar right now is rushing touchdowns. And, that's not to say that Josh Allen isn't in the MVP conversation. He certainly is. But I think prisoner of the moment is kind of what I would use here, Sam, because Lamar had his worst game of the season. Meanwhile, Josh Allen slayed the dragon. He beat the Chiefs on an incredible fourth down run. And obviously, when you look at week-to-week league, well, Lamar didn't play great. Josh Allen had a game where he went and he did the thing that everybody was hoping that he would do in defeating the Chiefs. But then there's also the erasure that we've seen. Stephen A. did this a couple of days ago where he was like, oh, when Lamar played the Bills, he and Josh Allen were they played pretty similar football. And I'm just first of all, the Bills got blown out. Second of all, Josh Allen did not have a touchdown. Lamar had 3 and a couple more total yards overall.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like Josh Allen's having a bad year, but one game, like Stephen A. said, does not define the season. And while all this doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, right, what Mad Dog has to say, what Stephen A. has, even the MVP for a lot of people, it's just at this point, a lot of people would prefer a Super Bowl MVP over another MVP. I think almost everybody in Baltimore would. But my thing with MVP is that even though I'm not necessarily I don't need Lamar to win MVP this season. If he doesn't, I'm not going to sit there and be oh, it's so bad. I'm so devastated. But I would like to see the best player and the most valuable player be rewarded for that, whether that be Lamar Jackson or whether it's not Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and I think, and we mentioned this last week, there might be a little bit of voter fatigue. I mean, how many weeks in a row can you say Lamar Jackson's the best quarterback without finding someone to combat it? So I think there's a little bit of that. And to your point, yeah, I think the city of Baltimore, everyone who roots for this team would like Lamar to win that Super Bowl and then that Super Bowl MVP to go with it. Usually that goes to the quarterback. But yeah, you're right. This award needs to be about who's the best quarterback in the league right now. And for all intents and purposes, after 12 weeks, Lamar's the best quarterback in the league. So I don't think there's much to do it. You could try and build someone up and Josh Allen without chopping the legs off of the guy who's clearly the better QB in Lamar Jackson, but I guess that's not how it goes in the national media. I'll let Lamar's game speak for itself, and that's probably what he's going to do the remaining 6 games of the season. But yeah, I don't pay too much attention to it because I know the mindset of these national guys. They want to make sure that there's some competition going on. And Josh Allen deserves some praise. And as you mentioned, he is in that conversation. But it's Lamar here and then a couple of notches below the rest of the league.
And that's just how it's been for most of the season. And the thing, Sam, you mentioned some controversy that needs to be created by the media or just competition in general, is the thing that really got me was talk about former coaches. Rex Ryan earlier in the week was talking about, let me tell you about Josh Allen. Josh Allen has this incredible running ability. And let me tell you how he's this great dual threat quarterback. And the rushing ability is such an asset to him. Where's this been for Lamar Jackson his entire career? Why is it Josh Allen can get praised for his running ability? Say, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Look at this. Josh Allen's a dual threat quarterback, and this is a real big thing. But for Lamar, so he's a running back. Well, he needs to go out and he needs to play wide receiver because all he does is run. He can't do that. And all the insults, all of the slander that have been thrown Lamar Jackson's way due to his rushing ability, which, by the way, is a huge asset. But people look at him and they say, oh, well, yeah, all he does is run. But, hey, Josh Allen can do it and doesn't have to face any criticism. That, to me, is like there are so many different reasons why that's the case, Sam. And I think we all know a bunch of different ones that actually apply here. But it's just like we're seeing it in broad daylight now. Like, again, I think they were trying to keep it under wraps a little bit, and they were like exposing Lamar. They were trying to while kind of keeping everything else under wraps. So now they're just out with Josh Allen in the MVP conversation. Like, oh, wow. Like, let's continue propping up the conversation with things that they could have easily propped Lamar up with, but they decided to slander him instead.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And I think a lot of it is because, people were down on Lamar coming in, and a lot of people want to be proven right about that criticism for Lamar, and it hasn't worked out. So in one aspect, you have Josh Allen. Everyone thought he'd be good. He hasn't been that guy, at least not to the level that people thought. And now that he's becoming that with less turnovers, doing it without Stephon Diggs, now they have the opportunity to prop him up. In other words, with Lamar Jackson, he's fighting the criticism all this time, and they're resisting. And so the moment that he kind of stumbles a little bit, that's when they attack. And that's pretty much national media in a nutshell. And even if Lamar wins this championship this year, which I still think he has a very good chance of doing, they're going to ask him to do it again and again and again and again. And when does it end? So I know Lamar doesn't take it too seriously. The Ravens don't do either. But as a fan and someone who watches all of this stuff, it's very frustrating to see. So, hopefully Lamar takes it to him this year and proves him wrong. But it'll probably be more of the same next year.
Yeah, speaking of talent and losing Stephon Diggs, I know a big conversation around Josh Allen has been, oh, look, he's doing all this, and Keon Coleman's been out, and they get Amari Cooper, but he's been in and out. Look, all the talent Josh Allen doesn't have, and this, that, and the other. And I'm sitting there like, excuse me. Did we not watch 5 years of Lamar Jackson, won an MVP with Willie Snead and Seth Roberts and rookie Marquise Brown? And no disrespect to those guys, obviously, but that's not Amari Cooper. That's not Stephon Diggs or any of those players. And so, yes, Lamar has the best talent he's ever had around him this season. There's no debating that. But again, it's like the stuff that they're propping up other guys with. They wouldn't do that for Lamar Jackson. So you're right, Sam. That is national media in a nutshell. But let's talk about Lamar's performance in general a little bit, get into some of the X's and O's around that from week 11. I know you turned on the tape. I know you watched that game and you watched that film. Wasn't a great overall day from Lamar. I wouldn't say it was the main reason Baltimore lost, but certainly some missed opportunities left out there from Lamar. What'd you see out of him, and how would you assess his performance?
I think the Steelers were daring him to throw the football. I think a lot of people would say that, the Steelers do a good job of baiting Lamar to throw, and that's not really on Lamar. That's on Todd Monken and John Harbaugh to really establish the run and say, we're going to run the football no matter what. Something the Steelers did. I mean, the Steelers ran the ball. Didn't have a lot of success most of the time, but they stayed with it, partially because that's their offense, and a lot of people point to the Ravens and say, what's your identity? It should be running the football. So hopefully they don't turn back. And this was so reminiscent of the AFC Championship game. It was kind of sickening to watch sometimes. But yeah, you have Derrick Henry. He had 5 yards of carry. Use him, and then you can establish the play action with that. What you saw was a Lamar Jackson who was trying to force throws, force things to happen with his arm. He was trying his best to stay in the pocket because that's what the Steelers were giving him. But when you do that, you do have to be completely perfect, get those tight window throws. And if you don't get it, coupled with the penalties, the stalling of those drives, then you get a situation where you're fighting to get a 2-point conversion and tie things up. at the end of the game. So I think Lamar had a decent game. I don't think, that interception that really should have been a fumble is, just a superb play by that Steelers defender. So I don't really knock him for that turnover. Lamar's still playing pretty darn good football, and I expect that to continue throughout the rest of the season. He just didn't have his A game. It was his B game, and unfortunately, B wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, the conversation about Lamar is he shouldn't have to have an A game every single week to will this team to a victory. If some other people have to pick him up. And I thought the defense did a good job of that. I thought the defense picked him up for sure, but it was just Tucker missing the field goals, a couple of situational miscues for the Ravens, and we talked about those penalties and that sloppiness in the first part of the show as well. Coming up in the final part of the show, Ravens have a big one, Monday Night Football, Ravens and Chargers. We'll dive into the film of what Sam has seen and talk about how well the Ravens match up with Los Angeles. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by Bilt. With the seasons changing, I'm already dreaming of a warm weather getaway. I love using points for travel, and I'm always looking for ways to earn more to book my next flight. Here's a life hack for you. Bilt lets you earn points on rent payments and redeem them towards flights, hotels, and a lot more. One of your biggest investments should be getting you more than just a roof over your head. Let me explain. There's no cost to join Bilt, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Bilt points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Bilt points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards future rent payment and unique experiences that only Bilt members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl to start earning points on your rent payments today. We're back. Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, Sam Njoku still talking with you here on this Purple Friday. Getting closer and closer to that Dixie Cup patterned outfit that I'm going to wear for a week. Obviously, if you're new to the channel, what that means is once I hit 10,000 subscribers, I'll be wearing that for an entire week. Promise that the first day ever doing YouTube here. So actually we're under 500 away now. Under 500 away from wearing that outfit. So really excited. Appreciate everybody who tunes in video form, also in audio form. That community grows every single day. So shout out to everybody who tunes in and listens to Locked On Ravens. Now, Sam, I've been telling people all week, I think this game is a lot more massive than some people are making it out to be here for a couple different reasons, right? I think obviously you lose this game, 5 AFC losses through 12 weeks is pretty bad conference record wise. I think Baltimore would be the only team by far to have that record in the AFC, which when you're talking about seeding, that's not great. Now we're recording this before the Steelers play the Browns. So if the Steelers beat the Browns on Thursday night, which hopefully that does not happen, hopefully Jameis can do to Pittsburgh what he did to Baltimore and provide that little trap game magic. But if that happens and Baltimore loses, Baltimore essentially is 3.5 games out with Pittsburgh from the north. I believe that's the correct number, if I'm not mistaken. But you also have to think that if Baltimore gets a wild card spot, the Chargers are more than certainly going to get one too. And you lose that head-to-head tiebreaker with the Chargers. And the way the AFC is shaping up, Houston got a good win against Dallas, but let's be honest, Sam, it was Dallas. It was Dallas. I think the 5 seed is licking their chops seeing Houston there at 4, and I think that's kind of where Houston's going to finish unless something crazy happens. I'd much rather, if I'm Baltimore, be that 5 seed. If I'm a wild card team, play Houston, get a win on the road there, instead of having to go to Pittsburgh or go to Kansas City or go to Buffalo if you're the 6 seed. So I think that people are talking about, get back on track, this, that, and the other. I think this has massive implications down the line for this team.
This is as urgent as it gets. If the Steelers game was 1A in terms of urgency, this is definitely 1B. You mentioned it. The Ravens have had losses to the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Browns, and now the Steelers. 4 AFC foes, a 5th AFC conference loss with 5 games to play is catastrophic. They cannot let that happen. So this is huge. Yeah. And as you mentioned, the Chargers are likely going to make the postseason. So that tiebreaker will play massive implications in terms of seeding. So yeah, the Ravens need to get this win. It's as close to a must-win game as a must-win game can get. I think the next week's opponent, is the Eagles, so that's the NFC opponent. Not much there. So you got to get this win. I think this is massively more important than next week's game. They got to get it done.
Yeah, you also don't want to just limp into your bye week. I mean, I know, you got the Eagles, as you mentioned, Sam, but, let's say you beat the Eagles, but you lose to the Chargers, you limp in with 2 of your 3 being losses before the bye week. That's tough. So just even from momentum's sake, it's going to be a big conversation. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how Baltimore actually matches up with the Chargers. I know that it's a lot of former Ravens going on over there, players, coaches, very similar schemes to what we've seen in the past. Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, spent some time with the Ravens and obviously under Mike McDonald in Michigan as well. Obviously, Greg Roman, we are very familiar with the Greg Roman type of offense here in Baltimore. How do you think that Baltimore matches up with their former friends turned enemies?
It's going to be interesting because I think the Ravens offense does match up well with the Chargers defense. Now, the Chargers defense is good. I mean, before that game against the Bengals, they were the number 1 scoring defense in the league, 9th in pass defense. So that is a good football team for sure, especially on that side of the ball. But unless the Ravens falter and do things like we saw against the Steelers and not running the football, penalties out the wazoo, then of course you'll have an offense that stalls. But I expect this Ravens offense to bounce back and bounce back big. On the defensive side of the ball, it's interesting because, one, you have Greg Roman's offense. You know he's going to want to run the football. You know he has some running backs there, a guy we're very familiar with, toting that rock. So the Ravens need to make sure their run defense is very supported. Travis Jones injured. We don't know how he's going to be, if he's going to be able to play. Roquan Smith, we definitely saw this run defense falter a little bit with his absence and a little bit with the pass defense as well. But overall, this defense without Roquan Smith is vastly different than without. Also, the Ravens made a lot of changes to that secondary. We have Ardarius Washington. We have Kyle Hamilton at the safety spots now. Kyle Hamilton not playing that big nickel spot. They don't really have 3 safeties. They really used in Marlon Humphrey inside that defense to be that solid guy, that physical defender to get out there in certain passing downs to really wreak havoc against those tight ends or running backs or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see if they have Trey White starting opposite Nate Wiggins instead of Brandon Stevens, as White took over for Stevens in the 4th quarter of that Steelers game. So a lot of unknowns. The Steelers offense isn't really that great. They only kicked 6 field goals and found a way to win. So I don't think they'll have that with the Chargers. So this defense has another big test ahead. So it's very difficult for me to say one way or another if the Ravens defense will have success. I'm worried about the run defense just a little bit because if Greg Roman finds a way to take advantage of a team without Roquan Smith, that's if he doesn't play, then it could be a shootout of sorts. I won't say shootout because they'll be running the football a lot, but definitely one of those games where it's going back and forth. So I'll be interested to see how the Ravens defense performs, but I like the matchup, especially with the Ravens offense against this defense. I think the Ravens offense matches up very well. And I think if this run defense can get it going, even without Travis Jones and Roquan Smith, then this defense will be fine.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because the Chargers' run offense this year is actually only 20th in the league in terms of yards per attempt. Now, they run the ball a decent amount. They're top 10 in attempts. Yeah. But, Gus Edwards has kind of had a tough year in Los Angeles. He got injured midway through the season. I think he's back now. But then obviously JK has been the big story. And I'm so happy for JK. Just needs to put it on the shelf for a week and not do that against Baltimore. You can do it against anybody else, just not the Ravens. But this is almost the top 10 passing offense the Chargers have in terms of yards per attempt. They're number 11 in yards per attempt with only, their yards, their attempts, they're 30th. They're 30th in attempts, but they push the ball down the field. And both of these defenses, Sam, it looks like they're both that bend, don't break, where they'll let you take the short stuff, let you take the intermediate stuff. Once you get down on that red area, you're not going to be able to go out there and really get the points you need. It's what we saw against Pittsburgh. Down in the red zone, Pittsburgh goes 0 for 4 in the red zone, and you mentioned they kick 6 field goals. That should be enough. It should almost every single 99 out of 100 times. That is we talked about that last week. And we're like, hey, limit them to a kick on every possession. You win the game with this Ravens offense. And of course it's not enough. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts because you mentioned Brandon Stevens, you mentioned Trey White, all the changes in the secondary. What would you do there? Obviously, there's been a lot of troubling signs for Brandon Stevens this year. I don't necessarily think it's been like people's calling him the worst corner in the league. I'm not going that far. Right. Yeah. But I do think it's been a decline from what we saw last year. It's been a bit of troubling, especially with not getting the head around in most of those situations. Trey White comes in, has a couple of huge pass breakups on George Pickens and makes his presence known in his first game. And we saw Trey White get some of those snaps and Brandon Stevens playing in the slot a little bit, playing in the box a little bit. would you rotate Stevens and Trey White in together? Would you just have the job go to Trey White in general? How would you kind of approach this cornerback rotation? Because I don't think you're moving Humphrey. I don't think you're moving Wiggins. I think it's the conversation between Stevens and Trey White.
Yeah, and I think maybe you ease Trey White in. You start Trey White, see how he does. If he performs as he did in the end of that Steelers game, you keep him on. If he begins to struggle a little bit, maybe you phase in Stevens a little bit. But I think the Ravens' overall goal will likely be to potentially, I know John Harbaugh kind of knocked this down, but it'll be great to have Trey White permanently at that corner spot, have Brandon Stevens play periodically in certain packages at safety, and then have Kyle Hamilton move into the line of scrimmage and work that off that way. I think Stevens would be, serviceable at that safety spot in certain situations. And we talked about big nickel where we have 3 safeties. That way, Kyle Hamilton can be at the line of scrimmage. That last game against the Steelers, Justin Fields gets those off tackle runs. Kyle Hamilton's there. That's not necessarily happening. So I think the Ravens need to be very, exotic in the way they plan this. But I think you had to give Trey White a chance. I think he's shown you enough in his limited amount of snaps. I think he had 24 snaps where you can say, let's give this guy a fair shot at it and see what he does. Brandon Stevens, I think, is still a great cover corner, great at man, but he just doesn't play the ball very well. And you saw situations where George Pickens waits until the last second to put his hands up to catch that football, and that's just a testament to Brandon Stevens not playing the ball or playing the quarterback. You're playing the defender. I mean, you're playing the receiver and waiting for him to make a move before attacking, and that hurts you in these types of games. And the Chargers do have weapons. Matt McConkey is one guy in particular that can cause some damage. So I say put White there for a little bit, see how he does, and keep him there if he's still hot, still doing good things, and have Stevens eventually play that safety role in nickel packages and have Kyle Hamilton go down there. I think that would be the most ideal situation, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think it could hurt at this point. I mean, we've just seen it too often with Brandon Stevens where those big plays are on him, and seems like teams are targeting him, and he has a lot of snaps, right? And with more snaps comes more opportunities to make plays or to not make plays. And in Brandon Stevens' situation, he hasn't made no plays this season, right? I don't want to make it seem like he's made no plays, but I just think that everyone had such high expectations for him. It's the same thing with Marcus Williams, right? Coming off the injury, everyone with the contract, such high expectations for Marcus, and it's just been a steep drop off. And I think for Brandon Stevens, it's the drop off from what we saw last season, and based off the high expectations he had. It's like Roquan too, where Roquan hasn't been like terrible all season, but Roquan's standard is best or second best at the very worst middle linebacker in the league. So he hasn't played up to that whatsoever. And that's where it's been a disappointing overall season for Roquan. But last week against Pittsburgh, but he definitely had his best showing of the season. He was everywhere. And that's why, not only just because he's Roquan Smith, without that momentum, be a really big loss for the Ravens. So, Sam, how do you think this game goes? I mean, I think it's going to be close. You mentioned kind of that back and forth nature I think is going to happen in here. John versus Jim games, always entertaining, as we saw in that Super Bowl, although it shouldn't have been as entertaining. Cough, cough, lights going out. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to see two teams that are fighting for playoff spots, fighting for seeding, fighting for the chance to go and play deep into January. I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens go and win the North, and that's still a possibility. That maybe the Chargers and Ravens face off in the playoffs again.
Yeah, I don't think the AFC North is out of the question for the Ravens at all. I think the Steelers still have a lot to show me for me to even consider them to be a top-tier AFC team. I know they won their games against the Commanders and the Ravens, and the defenses look spectacular, but that offense is still giving me pause, and they have big matchups. Christmas against the Chiefs, another matchup against the Ravens. So this division is far from decided. I do think this matchup is going to be going down to the wire. I think the Ravens win this game. I think the letdown from that Steelers game, I haven't even heard a peep from a lot of these players since that loss. They really have taken it to heart. I've heard from inside the castle that they're not taking it well. So they're fired up about this Chargers game. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think the Ravens do come out on top. Do you want me to give you a score prediction? Or
let's go for it.
Okay, score prediction. Okay, I'll say the Ravens win 31-24. Let's go 31-24. Ravens win by a touchdown. I think it comes down to Lamar Jackson getting the ball last and doing what he does best. But I think the run defense of the Ravens will decide how close this game is. I think if they can stop the run early, this offense, even though they're great at passing the football, is still predicated on starting with running the football, so if they can stop them early and force Justin Herbert into those passing situations. This pass defense has shown me something the last 3 weeks now to let me believe that they can come out on top in this one.
Yeah, a lot of ways the Ravens can win, a lot of ways the Ravens can lose. I think it's going to come down to the wire, and I'm going to go 27-23 Ravens win.
Nice.
I think that this game is so important, and the fact that they did come off that loss to Pittsburgh. And I actually see, Sam, a lot of Chargers people saying, like, man, getting this Demon Ravens offense after a big letdown loss against Pittsburgh, and everyone's like, shaking in their boots about that. I mean, I agree. It's like, I think that they're going to come out with a vengeance. I think they're going to come out all pissed off and ready to go out there and make another statement. And we know John Harbaugh, Lamar Jackson love playing primetime football. We know the stats. We know it's good all the way around. So I say Ravens 27-23, but it's not a must win in terms of you're missing the playoffs if you don't win it, but it's going to mean a lot down the line if you don't win. It's going to mean a lot if you do also, and I think that's the most important part there. But Sam, appreciate your time as always. Thank you again for hopping on talking football with me. Tell people where they can find you and what you're working on ahead of this game.
You can find me on YouTube at Ravens Talk Podcast. You can also find me on Twitter X at Ravens Talk Pod, Instagram at Ravens Talk Podcast, as well as TikTok at Ravens Talk Podcast. We have a show coming out. I think actually tomorrow, Saturday, we'll have Sean Merriman, a former Charger, and Maryland Terp on the show live on the studio to talk about the matchup and what he thinks is going to happen. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of trash talk between us, but that's all in good fun as we get ready for that Monday Night Football game. So pretty exciting stuff coming up. So if you're a Ravens fan, definitely tune in.
Yeah, let's go. Hey, that's going to be big. Be sure to check out Sean over on Sam's show. And Sam's show is great, as you just heard here, for about 40 minutes. Sam knows his stuff on the Ravens. Plus, that Ravens content he makes, it's funny. It's good. It's informative. And then he has the funny content. So be sure to check him out everywhere. Links in the description down below. Sam, appreciate you as always. And thank you to everybody for tuning into Locked On Ravens today. As I always say, see where the headlines take us. But bonus episode probably coming out tomorrow. And we'll have probably a couple this weekend as the game is on Monday. So, hey, stress-free Sunday of football for Baltimore, because we got that big Monday night matchup coming up. So we'll be back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens. Be sure on the way out, hit that like and subscribe button. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.